Any sailor knows the sinking feeling when the bridge windows suddenly turn white and the navigation marks disappear. You strain your eyes against the glass, looking for a flash of light or the dark shape of a buoy, but there is nothing. The radar screen becomes a solid wash of green clutter, and you realize the ship is moving into a narrow gap you can no longer see. The vessel was a product tanker, approximately 45,000 deadweight tons. We were in ballast condition, meaning the cargo tanks were empty. This resulted in a very high freeboard, with the hull towering out of the water like a large sail. We were approaching a pilot station in Southeast Asia. The location was an outer anchorage area, accessed through a marked channel between two shallow coral patches. The depth in the channel was adequate, about 20 meters, but the reefs on either side rose steeply to just 3 or 4 meters below the surface. On the bridge, the team consisted of the master, the second officer, and an experienced, able seaman on the wheel. It was mid-afternoon. The weather had been hot and humid with light variable winds. Visibility was originally excellent, over 10 miles. We could clearly see the pair of fairway buoys marking the safe water about 3 miles ahead. The plan was to pass between these buoys, slow down, and pick up the pilot just beyond them. However, in this region, weather can change rapidly. We saw a dark line of clouds building on the starboard quarter, moving effectively faster than our vessel. We were steering course 340 degrees true, making about 11 knots. The radar showed the channel entrance clearly, and we were lined up nicely on the leading lights, which were visible on the distant shore. Before I tell you what happened next, please consider subscribing. It helps this channel reach more sailors. This happened in 2004 on a routine commercial voyage. The atmosphere on the bridge was relaxed. We had run this approach many times. The second officer plotted our position on the paper chart every 5 minutes. The GPS confirmed we were on the center line. The trouble started as a visual anomaly. The horizon behind the starboard beam disappeared. The gray wall of cloud advanced quickly, consuming the sea surface. The wind picked up instantly, jumping from force 2 to force 6 in a matter of minutes. Because we were in ballast, the high side of the ship caught this sudden wind. The vessel began to heel slightly to port, and the bow started to pay off, pushed by the wind pressure on the starboard side. Leeway is increasing, the second officer noted. He stepped out to the bridge wing, but came back in immediately as the first heavy drops hit the deck. Steer 345, the master ordered, compensating for the wind pushing us to the left. Steer 345, the helmsman repeated. We were 2 miles from the entrance buoys. The squall line hit the ship with significant force. It wasn't just wind. It was a torrential tropical downpour. The sound of the rain hammering against the steel structure of the bridge was deafening. It sounded like gravel being thrown at the windows. "Start the wipers," the master said. The second officer switched on the heavy-duty pantograph wipers. They swept back and forth, but the volume of water was too high. It was like looking through a sheet of frosted glass. The visual reference points, the shore, the leading lights, and the buoys were gone. We were flying blind visually. "Watch the radar," the master said, stepping over to the X-band radar display. The second officer stood by the S-band radar. "Clutter is bad, Captain." The rain was so dense that it reflected the radar pulses. On the screen, the area around the ship was a solid blob of green echoes. The rain clutter obscured the targets. The master adjusted the anti-clutter. Rain control, FTC, trying to filter out the weather, returned to see the hard targets of the buoys. He turned the gain down, then up. He adjusted the pulse length. "I can't see the gate," the master said. His voice was steady but focused. The 2 buoys we needed to pass between were made of fiberglass and did not have strong radar reflectors. In calm weather, they were distinct dots. In this squall, they were lost in the noise of the rain. We were now 1 mile from the entrance. We were moving at 11 knots. The wind was pushing hard on the starboard beam, causing us to slide sideways toward the port side reef. "Come right to 350, the master ordered. He was guessing the drift. He couldn't verify it visually, and the GPS position lagged slightly behind the real-time movement of the ship. "Course 350, the helmsman said. The ship yawed in the swell that the squall had kicked up. The rudder was effective, but the windage was a constant force. "Reduce speed to slow ahead," the second officer suggested, looking at the gray window. No, the master said, if we slow down now, the wind will take charge of the bow. We need the flow over the rudder to counteract the leeway. We have to keep moving until we find those buoys. It was a calculated risk. Slowing down is usually the safe option, but in a high-sided ship with a strong beam wind, slowing down means losing steerage. If we slowed, the bow would swing violently downwind, pointing us directly at the port side reef. We had to maintain speed to fight the wind, but that meant we were closing in on the shallow water at high speed with zero visibility. I looked at the radar again. The rain cloud on the screen was directly over the channel entrance. The electronic bearing line, EBL, was set to our course, but without the buoy targets, we couldn't confirm if we were in the middle of the channel or sliding to the edge. GPS cross-track error is 0.2 cables port, the second officer read out. It's not updating fast enough, the master replied. Feel the roll? We are sliding faster than that. The vessel took a heavy roll to port. The wind was gusting stronger now, perhaps force 7. The rain was so thick. We couldn't even see the forecastle mast from the bridge. We were essentially inside a white room. Hard to starboard, the master ordered suddenly. He must have sensed the slide. Hard to starboard, the helmsman turned to the wheel. Midships, the master called out 10 seconds later. Steer 355. He was crabbing the ship. He was pointing the bow almost 20 degrees into the wind just to make a straight line over the ground. But without the buoys on the radar, we were estimating our position based on dead reckoning and instinct. Then the echo sounder alarm chirped. The depth had dropped from 20 meters to 15. We were getting close to the edge of the channel. The reef was rising. Where are the buoys? The master asked, leaning fast into the radar hood, adjusting the gain knob with small, precise movements. I need those buoys. The second officer stared at the S-band. I have a faint target, maybe, bearing 340 relative, range 4 cables. Is it the port or starboard buoy? I can't tell, the second officer said. It's just a single blip in the clutter. If it was the starboard buoy, we were safe. If it was the port buoy, we were currently steering directly into the reef. We were closing at 11 knots, blinded by rain with the depth alarm sounding. The rain intensified. It was no longer just a visual barrier. It was a physical weight on the sea surface, flattening the chop but obscuring everything beyond the bow. The radar scanner continued to rotate, but the screen remained a challenge. The green clutter pulses bloomed and faded with every sweep, masking the solid contacts we desperately needed to find. Depth 12 meters, the second officer said. He was standing by the echo sounder, reading the digital display. The graph showed a steep incline. The bottom was coming up. The channel depth was charted at 20 meters. 12 meant we were already on the slope of the reef. We were leaving the safe water. Is it shelving on the port or starboard side? The master asked, not looking away from the radar. Chart shows steep banks on both sides, Captain, the second officer replied. The gradient is identical. This was the problem. The depth sounder told us we were in danger, but it did not tell us which way to turn to find deep water. If we were drifting to port, we needed to turn starboard. If we had crossed the center line to starboard, we needed to turn port. A wrong turn at this speed, with the wind pushing the hull, would put us aground in less than a minute. The master looked at the wind direction. The anemometer showed the wind coming from the starboard quarter, relative to our heading. It was pushing the stern to port, which meant the bow was pivoting to starboard, but the whole vessel was sliding bodily to port. The physics suggested we were sliding toward the port side reef. Target on the bow is firming up, the second officer said. Range 3 cables. I looked at the S-band radar. The lower frequency S-band was penetrating the rain better than the X-band. A small, persistent echo had appeared. It was slightly to the left of our heading line. If that was the port buoy, we were heading directly for it. If it was the starboard buoy, we were already far outside the channel. It must be the port buoy, the master said quietly. The wind is setting us that way. Depth 10 meters, the second officer called out. The numbers were flashing now. The underkeel clearance alarm began to ring, a sharp rhythmic tone that cut through the noise of the rain. Starboard 20, the master ordered. Starboard 20, the helmsman replied. The rudder angle indicator moved. The ship hesitated. With the wind pressing on the high starboard side of the casing, the vessel was reluctant to turn into the wind. The rudder force had to overcome the windage. We waited for the rate of turn indicator to show a swing to starboard. "She is not swinging, Captain," the helmsman said. "Her rudder is 20 right." "Hard a starboard, ours," the master said. "Hard a starboard," the helmsman repeated. The wheel hit the stops. We were moving at 11 knots in a squall, with 10 meters of water under the keel, turning hard over based on a guess about a fuzzy radar blip. If the master was wrong, and that blip was actually the starboard buoy, we were about to turn full speed into the shallowest part of the reef. What would you have done in a moment like this? "Rate of turn is picking up," the second officer noted. "Swing is 1 degree per second." The bow began to move to the right. As the ship turned, the wind moved from the quarter to the beam and then forward of the beam. This changed the pressure on the hull. The ship heeled further to port as we turned into the weather. Suddenly the rain thinned for a fraction of a second. Not a clearing, just a variation in the density of the downpour. "Buoy on the port bow!" the helmsman shouted. We all looked. There, barely a ship's length away, was the port hand channel marker. It was a large steel buoy, bobbing violently in the swell. We were not passing it at a safe distance. We were almost on top of it. The ship had drifted so far to port that the buoy was now passing down our port side, less than 10 meters from the hull plates. "Midships," the master ordered immediately. "Meet her. Port 20. He had to stop the swing. We had cleared the buoy with the bow, but we were turning hard to starboard. This meant the stern was swinging out to port, directly toward the buoy we were passing. If the stern swung too wide, the propeller or the rudder would strike the buoy chain or the coral head beneath it. "Port 20, the helmsman said, spinning the wheel back the other way. "Hard a port," the master corrected himself. "Get the stern in." We needed to check the starboard swing instantly to keep the stern tucked in. The bridge wing passed the buoy. I stepped out onto the wing, shielding my eyes from the stinging rain. I looked aft. The buoy was sliding rapidly along the parallel body of the ship. It looked dangerously close. The wash from our hull was pushing the buoy away, but the stern was swinging toward it due to our previous turn. "Depth 8 meters, the second officer said. The alarm was continuous now. We were right on the edge of the shelf. The draft of the ship was only 6 meters, so we were not aground yet, but we were in the cushion of water that sits directly over the reef. "Give me full ahead," the master said. "Full ahead," the second officer rang the telegraph. The engine picked up. The kick of water over the rudder increased its efficiency. The master was using the blast of power to maximize the rudder's lift, forcing the stern to move to starboard, away from the danger, while the bow pointed back toward the center of the channel. I watched the buoy from the wing. As the stern approached it, the hull form narrowed. The suction effect, the hydrodynamic force that pulls floating objects toward the quarter, took hold. The buoy seemed to be sucked in toward our propeller. "Rudder is hard to port," the helmsman said. The ship shuddered as the engine reached full sea speed RPM. The vibration rattled the coffee cups on the console. We were driving the stern away from the impact. I saw the buoy pass the poop deck. It cleared the ship's side by perhaps 3 meters. It vanished into the whitewash of our wake and the gray curtain of the rain. "Midships," the master said. "Steer 340. "Midships, course 340, the helmsman answered. "Depth increasing," the second officer announced. 12 meters, 14 meters, 20 meters. We were back in the channel. The vibration of the engine settled as the water deepened, but the rain was still hammering against the glass. We had found the gate, but we were still blind, moving at 12 knots through a narrow slot in the reef. "Keep the radar on the 3-mile scale," the master said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Look for the next pair." The squall showed no sign of lifting. We had successfully entered the channel, but we still had 3 miles of restricted water to navigate before we reached the pilot station. The wind was still gusting, and now that we were inside the reef, the current would be channeled and stronger. "Reduce speed to slow ahead," the master ordered now that the immediate threat of the reef edge was past. "We cannot approach the pilot at this speed." "Slow ahead," the second officer rang. As the speed dropped, the ship felt heavy again. The steering became less responsive. We were safe from the first reef, but the ship was now yawing more noticeably in the following swell. We had to maintain exact alignment with leading lights we could not see. Target ahead, 1 mile, the second officer said, and right on the center line. That will be the pilot boat, the master said, or a fishing boat sheltering from the rain. We peered into the gray void. We had to trust the radar again. The vessel steadied on a course of 340 degrees. The vibration from the engine faded as the RPM settled to slow ahead. On the bridge, the atmosphere remained quiet. The master did not step away from the radar. He continued to monitor the electronic bearing line, checking our drift against the fixed range rings. Distance to target, 8 cables, the second officer reported. Target is stationary. Call the pilot station, the master said. Well, tell them we are inside the gate and approaching the boarding ground. The second officer picked up the VHF handset. Pilot station, this is the tanker. We have passed the entrance buoys. We are 3 miles from the boarding position. The radio crackled. Copy that, Captain. Pilot boat is waiting for you. Wind is strong outside, but the swell is manageable. Please make a lee on the port side. Rig a combination ladder. Copy combination ladder on the port side, the second officer replied. Because we were in ballast, our freeboard was nearly 12 meters. A standard pilot ladder is not long enough or safe enough for that height. The deck crew had already rigged a combination arrangement. The accommodation ladder lowered partway down, with a short pilot ladder securing it to the water level. The rain began to lighten. It didn't stop, but the intensity shifted from a solid wall of water to a heavy drizzle. Slowly, the gray curtain ahead began to thin. We saw the faint outline of the breakwater lights in the distance, and then, closer in, the orange mast light of the pilot boat bobbing in the chop. I have visual on the pilot boat, the helmsman said. Very good, the master said. He finally stood up straight, stretching his back. He walked to the front window. Wind is still on the starboard quarter. If we want to make a lee on the port side, we need to bring the wind onto the starboard bow. This required a significant maneuver. We were still in the channel, but we were entering the wider anchorage area. We had room to turn, but we had to be careful not to drift downwind during the swing. Starboard 20, the master ordered. Let's bring her head to wind. The ship began to swing to starboard. As the bow crossed the wind, the speed dropped further. The hull acted as a shield for the water on the port side. The white caps on the port quarter disappeared, leaving a patch of relatively calm water. The lee. Midships, the master said. Steady on aerofort off 5. We were now crabbing sideways again, but this time it was intentional to hold position for the pilot. The pilot boat approached from the stern, cutting across our wake. We watched it pitch violently in the swell until it tucked itself into the shelter of our hull. Pilot boat alongside, the second officer confirmed, looking over the port wing. We waited. The transfer is always a critical moment. If the ship rolls too heavily, the pilot boat can be crushed under the accommodation ladder. The master watched the inclinometer. The roll was gentle, less than 2 degrees. Pilot? On the ladder, the radio from the deck officer chirped. 2 minutes later, the door to the bridge opened. The pilot walked in, dripping wet, removing his heavy rain gear. He looked calm, unbothered by the weather. Good afternoon, Captain, the pilot said, shaking the master's hand. Bit of a squall out there. Good afternoon, the master said. Visibility was 0 at the entrance. It happens this time of year, the pilot said, checking the chart. We will proceed to the inner anchorage. The berth is not ready until tomorrow morning. Please keep her on slow ahead, the master nodded. Slow ahead, course 045. The immediate danger was over. The pilot took over the con, giving orders to the helmsman. The second officer returned to the chart table to log the time of pilot boarding. I watched the radar. The rain clutter was clearing up completely now. The coastline was painting a solid yellow line on the screen. The buoys were clearly visible as distinct dots. We continued for another hour, navigating through the traffic in the anchorage. The pilot knew the local currents well. He compensated for the drift without looking at the GPS, using shore marks that were now visible. Let go port anchor, the pilot ordered eventually. Let go port anchor, the chief officer replied from the bow via UHF radio. We heard the heavy rattle of the chain running out through the hawse pipe. The ship vibration changed as the brake was applied. We backed down on the engine to dig the anchor in. Anchor brought up, the chief officer reported. 4 shackles in the water. Chain is tight at 12 o'clock. "Finished with engines," the pilot said. The master rang, "Finished with engines," on the telegraph. The engine room acknowledged. The main navigational lights were switched off, and the anchor lights were switched on. The bridge team relaxed. The silence returned to the wheelhouse, broken only by the hum of the ventilation fans. The incident was caused by a convergence of common factors: a vessel in light ballast condition, a sudden tropical squall, and the resulting loss of visual references at a critical choke point. When a ship is in ballast, the large surface area of the hull above the water acts like a sail. In this case, the windage on the starboard side created a significant leeway that the GPS could not calculate instantly. The radar, usually our primary backup, was degraded by the heavy rain return. We were essentially navigating by dead reckoning for 3 minutes in a narrow channel. The critical decision was the master's choice to maintain and momentarily increase engine power. In low visibility, the instinct is often to stop or dead slow. However, with a strong beam wind, slowing down would have caused the bow to pay off downwind, likely grounding the vessel on the port reef. By keeping the speed up and using the engine kick, the master maintained rudder authority and kept the ship answering the helm. We stayed at anchor for 2 days before berthing. The weather cleared up the next morning, and the channel entrance looked wide and easy in the sunlight. It is strange how different a piece of water can look when you can actually see the markers. The equipment was checked. The X-band radar magnetron was found to be slightly degraded, which contributed to the poor clutter suppression. It was replaced at the next port. If you've seen something similar during your career, I'd like to hear it.